Welcome back to the channel for part 5 of the Fishing 101 tackle series. So I've explained the basic theory behind all fishing lures and how they all work. They just have different applications. I've talked about the different colors and tried to simplify that for you. I've also talked about amplifiers, which basically kind of will help you to understand how all fishing lures are made and designed and what the thought process is behind them. So I want to talk now about application, fishing application, because this is the other big thing that you have to understand when you're picking the type of lures that you want to buy is, what kind of application do I need for that particular purpose? So we're going to talk about the different applications that you might need to use a particular lure in, and that is definitely going to depend on the kind of lure that you buy, because you might have 5 lures that are designed to catch the same fish, but because of certain features they have, they're going to work totally differently, and you need to work them totally differently. And to explain this concept today, I'm going to use my favorite fishing style of all, which is topwater. Okay, so using some of my favorite topwater lures, I'm going to discuss different applications for catching fish. So we're talking about only topwater, okay? So some obvious things. It's on the top of the water. It's not sinking lures. Okay, so we're not talking about anything subsurface, anything mid-depth, or anything fishing on the bottom. Now, the same criteria is going to apply to them as well. The same points I'm making is going to be across the board, but specifically, we're talking about topwater to give this illustration. So my favorite topwater lure, the first thing I'm going to grab immediately. In fact, this is my favorite lure overall of all fishing lures, and fishing lure, it and spinnerbaits would be basically tied for the most fish I've ever caught. And it's my favorite of all time, and it is the buzzbait. Absolutely love fishing a buzzbait. First time I ever saw a buzzbait, I thought that was the stupidest lure I'd ever seen in my life, and I thought, no fish is going to bite something that's got that gigantic thing in the front of it, big piece of metal. And I didn't even like the skirt thought process. I just didn't get it. And then I knew a guy who caught tons of bass all the time, and his favorite lure was a buzzbait. And I said, really? And he got to telling me, and I saw him catching fish, and then I started using them, and then I started catching fish, and then I was hooked. Pun intended. Okay. This particular one has this little tiny pack-a-craw trailer on it. It honestly doesn't do a whole lot. But you can put a trailer on a buzzbait, as I've got a big toad on that particular buzzbait. You can use amplifiers with buzzbaits. This is a short profile. It's not very long. This obviously is a lot bigger. I love a 1/4 ounce size for the creeks and rivers. But, you can get the 3/8 and the 1/2 ounce size as well. This is a black and a red one, skirt. And I've got I believe it's a Zoom horny toad trailer on there. It's got a painted black blade. It has a clacker, as you can see here. It not only makes the normal sound of the buzzbait, but it makes extra sound. This particular buzzbait was actually meant to hit the head. It's a head clacker. I forget what they call it. I couldn't get it to work properly, so I bent it out where it doesn't hit the head, and I love this lure, and I've caught bass on it. So the buzzbait is an awesome lure. It's just a proven lure. It catches tons of fish. I've caught more fish with it and spinnerbaits than anything else. In my opinion, a buzzbait, in fact, all topwater, well, no, that's wrong. Most topwater lures, in my opinion, should be imitating a frog, because that's generally what's going to be on the top. Yeah, you can have a dying bait fish, and you can have some other things we're going to talk about here in a second, but generally a frog should be what you're looking for. So if you're fishing topwater, generally speaking, your natural colors are going to be a white or a green, yellow, chartreuse, something like that. But like we've talked about earlier, black will always be a good color. It'll always silhouette well on topwater. It'll always do really good. Now, the application. The best thing, in my opinion, about a buzzbait yeah, it makes all the noise, it draws the attention, but it's so easy to not get hung up. Now, you're on top water, so you're not worrying about stuff under the water that you're going to get hooked on. You don't have a treble hook, you don't have a treble hook that's going to grab everything, so you're obviously going to go right over stuff. Well, the thing about a buzzbait is you're constantly reeling it, because this thing's going to sink. It's going to sink like a rock. So if you stop reeling it, it's going to sink to the bottom. You have to, as soon as you throw it out there, you got to start reeling it, keep it on top, as slow as you can possibly reel it, but yet keeping it on top. And if there's a log, even if the log is out of the water a little bit, as long as you keep reeling it, this thing's just going to pop right over it. Just keep on going. So this thing you can throw in the middle of the worst looking brush pile you've ever seen. As long as you do it within reason, you're probably not going to get hung up. You can pull it right out of there as long as you're keeping it moving and you're not letting this thing turn over and hook. This thing is so awesome. So the application obviously is you can get in all kinds of laydowns and trees and stumps and brush piles, and it's just going to go right over. It's not going to get hooked up. Favorite lure of all time, the buzzbait. So what's some of the other ones? Now, that would be, I would consider that it's in the spinnerbait family, but it's really a prop bait, because the buzzbait's kind of a spinner / prop. But you got a lot of prop baits. You have torpedoes and different things. Another one I really like is the Whopper Plopper. It has this awesome spinning tail on it. Now, this obviously is meant to mimic a fish, as you could tell, but in my opinion, it's still a frog presentation. So I love the Whopper Plopper. It basically does the same thing. It's spinning. So you're going through there and you're churning up the water. The prop on this particular one is obviously, well, on all Whopper Ploppers, is in the back of the bait versus the front. Now, but this is a different presentation. This has treble hooks, or as I like to call them sometimes, treble hooks. So they're going to catch on everything. So if you've got a tree that's laid down with a lot of brush and weeds everywhere, and the water's just barely right up there, and it's very, it's a very tight area to get casts into, I don't want to throw this. That's not the correct application for something with treble hooks, okay? Because this thing is going to get hooked up. In that case, I'd immediately go for the buzzbait. If I'm have a little bit of open water with, yeah, I've got some cover to fish around, but I can easily make a cast on the edge and not get right up inside of stuff, then I'm going to go with the Whopper Plopper if the buzzbait is not working. So a prop bait can be awesome, and your hookup ratio is probably going to be better because of the treble hooks. But it's going to get hung up more if you try to fish it in really, really tight, gnarly stuff. Now, the cool thing about the prop bait versus the buzz bait is it floats. So you're fishing a little bit more open water. You have more area to cast. You're not worried about getting hung up as easy. You can throw this out there and let it sit for a couple seconds, 5 seconds, and just kind of calm down and then start reeling it. Or if you get to a spot where you want to stop for a second and do a stop and go retrieve, you can with this particular lure. Can't do that with a buzzbait. You don't need to do that with the buzzbait. It works great with a retrieve that is steady and never stops. But if you're trying to be a little bit more finesse, you're trying to be a little bit slower, maybe you're just wanting to chill out a little bit, you can throw this out there and just let it sit. So prop bait are awesome. They can float. You can take your time, or you can burn it across the water. This thing is nonstop. It's the same pace. You just throw it, reel it, throw it, reel it. It's a blast. But they're different applications. So maybe you like the thought of this being out there and being able to stop it, but you want to go even slower. I mean, you really want to get this out there and just let it sit. Well, that's when you want to go with a popper. Here's more of a standard popper. Here's one, the Jackall Binksy, that's got actually a propeller on it and a little spinner. It's got all kinds of extra stuff, but generally your popper is just 2 treble hooks and a little tail, and you just pop it. So this is made to throw out there and literally just stop everything, and then pop it every once in a while. Pop it twice, pop it once. Now you can bring it in quickly if you like. You can actually walk the dog with it. You can do anything that you want to do with it, but generally speaking, it's slow. This is kind of in between. So this is made to walk the dog. You literally, as you pull it, it just does this the whole way back. And you can stop it, of course. It's also floats. In fact, every lure I've showed you floats except for the buzzbait, and most of your topwater lures are going to float. So if you're literally moving pretty quickly, a lot of stuff to fish around, and your application is, look, I just don't want to get hung up, but I want to fish quickly, buzzbait. If you want to fish pretty quickly, but you do want the ability to stop, but you also want a better hook set, and you're not going to be fishing an extremely gnarly brush, then whopper plopper. If you want to be pretty steady but maybe slow it down just a little bit, you got your walk the dog style. If you want to just go extremely slow because the fish aren't biting and you just want to be very finessey and slow, popper. Okay, so different styles for different applications. Okay, it's all top water, but it has different applications, and every one of these baits was designed knowing how you were going to fish it. Okay, now, so that application, that fishing design, that's going to apply across the board. If you're talking about lures that you fish on the bottom, if you're talking about fishing worms on the bottom, crawdads, soft plastics on the bottom, bass jigs, it's going to be the same way. You can have some with an open exposed hook because it's more of a swim jig. You're not planning on really stopping on the bottom, but you might. But you're more or less going to be just reeling it through the water with an occasional stop or slow down. You don't need it to be weedless, okay? But then if you're going to be on the bottom, for sure, then you're going to go with that football style head jig so it doesn't turn over, and you're definitely going to want it to be weedless, okay? So, and you don't want treble hooks. Obviously, if you're fishing a jig on the bottom, you don't ever see a jig with treble hooks on it because that would be crazy. So every fishing lure design is made based on the kind of application that you're going to be using it on. So if you're just getting started and you want to get into top water, and you're thinking, I don't really know what to buy, just think about how the lure is designed. If it's got treble hooks, it's not designed to be fished in really tight cover because it's going to get hung up. Okay, if you're wanting to fish slow and let your bait sit there, a buzz bait is not designed for that. It's going to sink, so you need a floating bait. Okay, now let's say you're fishing an extremely heavy cover like lily pads or heavy grass, but you want to fish top water. Even though this is great and compared to these other lures that have treble hooks, it's still going to get hung up. And it's not really made to go across that super thick grass or super thick lily pads properly. Then you got your topwater frogs, okay? This is the ultimate. Yeah, it's top water. It's not a hard bait. It's soft. Soft. It's a soft plastic. It's hollow inside. It has these hooks that are exposed once the fish clamps down on it. Usually we'll have two. It's what they call a weedless presentation. Just like when a jig is weedless, it has that little, I can't think of the right term, but it sticks out there and it prevents the hook from getting hung up. Well, you can't even see those hooks, but they're right there. They're on the back. So until that fish clamps down, the hooks are not going to be exposed. So if you're going to fish on top of lily pads or through real thick moss or some kind of vegetation, even the buzzbait's just going to grab everything and you're just going to be pulling a bunch of moss. But this thing will actually get on top of that, and so that's your application. So if you're ever overwhelmed by thinking, oh my gosh, this person's using a frog, this person's using the whopper plopper, but these guys swear by the buzzbait, I don't know where to go. Well, they're all doing different things. So it's not that one is better than the other, but they all have a different purpose. So understand the purpose and the design behind the bait and the type of application that you're going to be using it in. So I don't have a lot of experience fishing a frog, but I always have a frog with me because even though I love fishing the buzzbait, there's going to be times where, like even in the fall when there's so many leaves on top of the water, it's hard to get the buzzbait to not grab a leaf. So this will be good for that, whatever the case. So all lures have an application, okay? Now you don't need 100 lures that fit 5 different applications. You might just need one. You might need a frog. Slow, popper. Want to walk the dog, go a little quicker? Spook. You want to fish a little faster? Prop style bait. You want to fish even faster and never stop and just have a blast, and not worry about getting hung up as much? Buzzbait. Super thick cover. You need something that's weedless. Topwater frog. And like I said, if it's mid-depth lures, if it's spinner baits, your spinner baits, I don't have one out here, but are literally that whole, let's just pretend this was a spinner bait, the whole wire up here with the 2 spinners on it is literally going to block a lot of your stuff from getting hung up on that hook. So spinner bait's a great weedless tool. If you're fishing a crankbait, it's not weedless. You got those exposed treble hooks. So every lure is going to have an application. Just think about how weedless that it is. Just think about on top water if it floats or if it doesn't float. If it's an underwater lure, think about how quickly it floats. Is it heavy? Is it made to sink quickly? It's got a lot of weight to it. Is it made to sink slowly? You just have to understand the design behind the lure. And then you can narrow that down to decide, well, I really don't need all those lures. I just need maybe these 6, because these 6 would represent the different type of applications that I'm going to be fishing in the areas that I fish for the for the game fish that I fish. Now, before I let you go, since we're talking about topwater, my favorite type of lure, I'm going to show you some unnecessary lures, okay? These would be kind of in the realistic category. So if you think of like a spinnerbait or a crankbait in that mid-depth range, you also have a swim bait that looks like a real sun perch, for instance, and it's in segments and it's just made to go like this, but it's kind of its own category. It's just made to look super real. Well, you also have a super real style with topwater, and topwater is basically the only area that I go a little crazy on. I'm pretty simple. I go very, everything's simplified, and colors, just a few colors. I just try to really simplify and narrow everything down. But with topwater, sometimes I go a little crazy. For instance, I have told you before that pretty much all topwater lures should basically be trying to mimic a frog. But there are exceptions, like this rat. Now, do I need this rat? No, I don't. But it's fun to have something like this. So this is a very realistic rat. It's kind of a wake bait, it's going to be on top of the water. It has a treble hook, so you're not going to be casting it in really thick stuff. But this is kind of a realistic bait. Okay, it's made to be very realistic, have a very good action. And let's just be honest, it's made to catch a big bass. Okay, it's not made to catch something little. But maybe you've fished an area where you saw several mice swimming around. You match the hatch. It's a natural presentation. So get something like that. On that same realistic side, you might want to fish a little turtle. I call that Master Splinter, and this is Michelangelo. This particular turtle is similar to the frog, so you're going to bite down and have those hooks. It also has an extra hook back here, but it's kind of a propeller bait. So it's got these little feet that are going to have basically like 2 buzz baits that are going behind it, and it's going to float. Now you say, do you really think a fish is going to bite that? Yes, I do. I just got this pretty recently, and same with these other lures I'm showing you, so I haven't had a whole lot of chance to fish them. I've seen a lot of turtles in the areas that I fish. So why on earth would a bass not want to bite this? I bet it would. So these would be in that realistic category. And then I got one more to show you. This little duck. I watched a video on YouTube, and he used a bigger version of the yellow duck and caught a lot of pike on it. It was a pretty cool video. So I know that they work. Now, in Missouri, where I live, the majority, or the most common duck is the mallard. And so this is more of a mallard-style duck. It's like that turtle, though. It's got two prop feet. It has a hook with feathers around it, so it's not weedless, but it's on top. You can get a little wire that runs down here and has another treble hook. So this style bait is really kind of niche. You know, it's something that you don't need. So if you're just getting started fishing, you don't need to go that route. But it is fun. And if you do go to a place and you see a lot of little ducks swimming around and you're trying to catch a big muskie or a bass, match the hatch. You know, if you see a lot of turtles, why not go with that? But basically all lures come down to you know, fishing it off the bottom, fishing it mid-depth at some point, or fishing it on top water. And then you've got just a few styles. You've got basically your jig head style, which I talked about in the last video, is all your bass jigs, all your spinner baits, all your buzz baits. They're all based on a weight and a jig. Then you have your hard baits. It's literally self-explanatory. They're just hard baits. They're not based off a jig, and they almost always have treble hooks, okay? And then you have your realistic baits, which could be swim baits for mid-depth, you know, look like an actual fish swimming, or you could have some of these topwater lures that look very realistic. But basically, in all these applications, just think about the features of the lure and think about the kind of area that you're going to be fishing in, and that's all you really need to know, okay? And you can cut down the number of lures that you own big time. And you don't need to buy every lure that I've got here. You could just have a few. You could literally, if you had this, and these two, you are good to go. You could catch a ton of fish on just a handful of topwater lures. So up until next time, have a good day and take care.